At this point, what we did is we put in the vertical upright from the front, and we played it off of the bottom horizontal rail. And now what we want to do is, and for the sake of this video, we actually already put in the rib nuts into this vertical rail to show the bed install if you're just installing the bed. If you are going to continue on to install the rest of the track, the next step is to set this top track. And we're doing that before we even put in the rib nuts, just using the set screws. Okay, so we're going to install the top track now. And in order to do that, we're going to actually use the window cowling. But you don't have to use the window cowling. You can just take the measurement from this top of this track, which we put in earlier, the horizontal track on the bottom. Then we set our vertical track off of that horizontal track. And you can take the measurement from here to the top and just work your way down to this side of the van on front of the window box and make that same mark. I like to use the window shroud and just set it over the top because that is the actual piece of material that goes there. So this is the box. You'll have one of these boxes in your kit, and inside is the window shroud. There is a small part and there is a tall, longer part. The longer part goes on the bottom. And right here, I'm just slipping it behind this little thing and running forward, putting it right behind here. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll set our top track on the top of that cowling, and that gives us our height to run across here. Now the front of this, you do not have to run this to the front because this gets covered by your B-pillar. What I like to do is pay attention to the back, and again I keep it about 1/4 inch off of the back D-pillar. So on this back side, we're going to move this back, let it slip to where it's just about, again, like I said, 1/4 inch or so off the back. And the holes are going to line up only in one direction with this. If it's flipped over the other way, these holes will go through some of these holes and you'll notice that they're not going to hit. So these will only hit metal if this track is put in with the correct one, correct facing forward, holes facing forward. So if it's flipped upside down, it won't fit, basically. Now I always like to set the one closest to the track first. So I'll put this one in right here. And suck that up tight. And we'll make our way down to here. Cool. And then I'll set one at the very end here. And then again, skip 2, set 1. And skip a couple and set 1 again down here. And now, all of this is where we want it so that we can punch the holes out for the rib nuts. I'm going to go ahead and set the passenger side right now too. And in setting the passenger side here, we just want to make sure we're lined up flush to the front edge of this wall track. And again, make sure that this, if it's flipped upside down, it is not going to work. These holes will punch through, you know, open holes behind it. So it can really only be laid one way. I like to keep this one open so that we can set the hole, or set this rib nut the first time around. So I usually punch and set the screw in, one in from the end, like that. And then again, move to the back side here. I like to keep that one open so that I can punch a hole there. set one here. And since we've only got this much space, actually, this is probably going to work just fine because there's not a huge span between here, and we can set all three of these, plus these outside edges, and when we pull this off, we'll only have to set the two. So after you've set your set screws in and put the tracks where they need to go, it's time to drill out the holes. And we did it earlier in this bed mounting video. If you haven't seen that yet, there's several ways to go about it, but basically we want to punch this hole in the center, and so when we pull the track off, we can widen that hole and set the set screws. I like to just use a regular step bit, just because I'm used to it. Some people like to use a hinge bit, which allows them to center it when they punch through. Although that hinge bit, in my experience, has been, there's enough fluctuation in there to where it doesn't actually center it completely. So I use the step bit and I punch the hole and widen it out to where it's just exactly the same width of the hole that's in the aluminum. If you scrape the inside of the aluminum, don't worry about it. If you punch through multiple rings, do worry about it. You don't want to do that. If you're just barely carving it out, it's not going to be a problem. After you put all the holes in, the initial holes, go ahead and pull the set screws and drop your track. It's aluminum, and so you don't want it to be scuffed up and so don't face it upside down in your van, and keep care of it while you're going through this next phase. So I'm just going to pop the set screws out. Yeah, that side, Nathan. Go over here. Okay, so after we remove the top and the bottom track, we no longer need to use this, and we can put this back in the box or someplace that is safe and keeps clean. And we'll use this, basically it can stay there until the end when we put it back in in the final phase. So after we drop the track, we remove the shroud, now we're going to widen our holes that we widened out earlier. Now, it's going to be tempting again to punch and widen out the holes that you use the set screws for, and honestly 9 times out of 10 that'll be okay, but the time that it's not okay, it's really bad. When your rib nut is off by a little bit and you can't set your track screw into it, it's a huge process to recenter that. These set screw holes are not going to be dead center with your holes that are in your track. So if you follow this protocol where we set the rib nuts first in the holes that we widened, throw the track back up, then we'll widen the holes that were the set screws were in, drop the track, and go through this process one more time. It's a little bit lengthier of a process, but in the long run, it'll actually save time, because one mistake with one of these rib nuts being off will take you way longer than it would take to go through this process. So I'm going to go ahead and punch these out, and Nathan from Mammoth Vans is going to come behind me and paint the holes and deburr. We just are using this to deburr the front edge. You can use a deburring tool, which I like to use, to make sure that it's a nice smooth hole. In the very back, you'll run into an issue where this, you can see right here, the metal on the flange, on this top flange, there's a crease right here, right? So the metal is bent down, and on this very back edge, where the van is coming in, we're going to actually bump into that metal. I like using just a real broad-headed punch and setting it back in against that metal. And just bending it out of the way. And that's if your rib nut, when you put your rib nut in there, it'll hit that this back of this and it won't be able to set. So I just, again, it's gentle. You're not slamming and beating your van up. You're just gently denting that little flange out of the way. And if we have any of them, when you go to set these rib nuts, this one right here is another one that might just be a little bit in the way. So that's all it takes, just a little bit to give it a dimple so that the rib nut will slip in there and bite completely. This happens 50% of the time. 50% of the time it won't happen. There is enough variation from van to van with the way that the vans are actually built that sometimes it's an issue and sometimes it's not. After we've put the sealer on all the holes, now it's just time to go through and rib nut. Again, I'm using the pneumatic rib nut gun, and if you are just doing one van, you'll likely just be using the hand setting rib nut tool. There are other options that we have on the website that we're going to be going over that you can look at, but in my experience, it's either you go all out with the very expensive pneumatic rib nut gun or use the hand tool. So it kind of gives you the best seating of the rib nut. Okay, so now it's time to, after we sealed all the holes, to come through and set the rib nuts. So after we put the first round of rib nuts in, I'm going to remount this track, and it's important after I get a few of these bolts in, it will be important to actually suck it up nice and snug where it'll actually live, so we can punch out the holes where the original set screws were. once you put those holes in, it's ready to drop back off. We'll go ahead, punch the holes, seal them, and set our rib nuts. I'm gonna go ahead and do that on the rest of the track, mount the track, punch the new holes, and then we'll drop everything. We've sent out over 200 kits so far, and we've had feedback from all of our clients as well as the other installers. And so the kit kind of evolves as we move forward. We're just getting a lot of feedback from ways that work better for different people, and we evolve the kit. It's a complex system, so it'll evolve over time. But yeah, over 200 kits that went out. We've had, of the 200 builds or more plus of the Adventure Wagon builds, 3 of them have been in accidents that totaled the vehicles, and all 3 of those kits were able to be pulled out and replaced into a new vehicle, which is something that was a huge plus because the insurance companies, of course, fought to not cover any of those kits, but they were able to be salvaged. So I developed the whole Adventure Wagon system. Basically, it was born out of a need to be highly modular. I had vans when I was younger. I grew up in the Sun Valley area in Idaho, and so there's a lot of camping up there, and a lot of recreation. And I always wanted to pull anything that I built in my vehicle for one weekend. At one point I had built-in lace cabinets and whatnot, and then the next weekend I'd want to go do something that would require me to remove cabinets, or I would have to use it for work, the van for work. And so, cut to 20 years later, I am developing a camper that I wanted to have modularity built into it, because I wanted to still use it for going to the lumber yard or to the nursery, but at the same time I wanted to be able to take the kids out on the weekends, or bikes and toys and whatnot, to go play out in the woods. So I standardized the tracking system and decided I could make accessories that would clip into the tracks if I kept the tracks in the same place, and I engineered structures behind it to make sure that they were solid enough to hold and secure storage systems onto them. And I could basically build different types of storage systems based on what the needs were, and people could swap out as their needs grow. You might start off without kids, and then you get kids. Later in life, you want that van that doesn't have seats to have seats for your kids, and you need a different bed situation. So the Adventure Wagon platform is kind of built upon the premise that you're going to have different needs, and you can swap the accessories out as you go along, and trade them with other people. If you are just getting rid of a single monk bunk, for instance, and you want the Moab bed, you just sell your monk bunk to somebody else who has the system. And ideally, you can keep the platform and let the accessories, by accessorizing the vehicle, it's allowed to grow with your needs and what you're doing in life at that time, which may even change summer to summer. You might pick up whitewater kayaking next year and have different needs than your mountain bikes do. How's it going? Good. So after we widen the holes, we're going to drop the tracks for the second and last time, set our rib nuts, and then when we put them back up, we will never have to remove the tracks again. You'll only loosen them a little bit to slide the panels in, but they'll primarily stay where they are. This will be the second time that we're pulling these down. And again, the reason why we do that is when we pull it off the first time, you'll have the set screw holes. You're going to want to drill them out, but if you do, it's very likely that these rib nuts are going to be off and they're not going to line up with the track. And the amount of time it takes to do this twice, you know, it might add 15-20 minutes to your process, but the amount of time it takes to futz with a hole where the rib nut is off and get a rib nut to go set properly is going to take you upwards of an hour or more. It's a non-winning situation. So really go the long route, do it this way, and you'll avoid complications. Okay, so sometimes you're going to punch through a hole that has the skin on the back as well as in the front. And all I did, again, is take this punch and I hooked it on the back skin and give it a couple of taps to get it out of the way of our rib nut when it sets. It'll have the clearance to pull back and not interfere with that other piece of skin that's flapping in front of it. So when we're putting this bottom one back on, this is the last time we're putting it on. I'm actually only going to screw these in about a 1/4 inch or so, maybe 1/2 inch, because I don't want them poking through too much on the inside of this. We'll be stuffing our insulation across this horizontal channel and it gets hung up on these bolts. So I just start them, put them in about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch beyond the start, so I have room on the inside to chase that insulation in. We'll be getting to that a little bit later in the video. It's also important to hand start these. And I don't like using a electric drill. You can, but if you do, be very gentle. Hand start them so that they don't cross thread. If they cross thread these rib nuts, likely you'll create what we call a spinner where it's spinning, and then you'll have to cut the rib nut out, and we'll show you a different video on how to remove a spinner. But I like to just start them up by hand. I use hand tools. Other people use mechanical or drills. But again, just start it by hand. It'll save you a lot of problems. With the top, again, I'm hand starting everything, but it's not necessary to keep it out because the insulation doesn't get up into this very top cavity, so I'm just going ahead and I leave it loose until I get all the bolts in, and then come back and tighten it up. And that lets the track play a little bit while you're putting your bolts in. So the last thing we're going to do with the rib nuts are set them into the OEM holes that fasten the door covers. We provide the door covers, and instead of set screwing them with with the self-tapping screws, over time the door will slam so many times that those set screws actually start breaking loose. So we like to punch the hole here and set the rib nut into those spots to make it a good solid connection there. And again, what I'm not showing very good practice. You don't want to be rubbing your finger over that. If anything, use your brush, and then you can go back through and deburr it. After you set your holes, you deburr it, put the sealer on it, just like we did with the other rib nuts. I'm going to go ahead and punch the upper ones for the sliding door, and then we'll be ready to seal this whole thing and put the rib nuts in. For the back doors, we just punch out the four corners. I don't necessarily punch out the middle centers here. I don't find they're necessary because the panel that we're putting in is quite a bit stiffer.